Welcome back to Dane Comics, and today I want to talk about the decline of the comic book industry and how it all started and the trigger. And if you cannot tell, my theory is that it all started with the death of Superman. And I have very good reasons why I feel that way. So, a lot of you know the famous Superman 75, right? Issue, the Death of Superman issue, in the black, poly bag, and at one point that was like $100, but now you can get it for like $20, maybe less even, because they printed 1 million of those things, and they were sold up, so many of those things, right? And thinking about this topic, I just ripped one open because I've never done it, and this is what comes in the packet. You got this little newspaper clipping. Got this awesome poster. This is actually like a pretty cool thing. I've never seen this. Got these weird stamps, this armband, celebrate or to commemorate, trading card, and the book. And I've never even seen that cover. I didn't even know that was the cover. Interesting. I thought it was gonna be like, I don't know, kind of like the poly bag. Anyway, it's like a tombstone, right? I guess. Should have maybe shaped it right. Anyway. Why did this lead to the decline of comics, the comic book industry? Before Superman died, when heroes died in comics, they stayed dead or they didn't really die to begin with. That was pretty much what it was. Superman dies and they sell millions of comics, and this is just about at the peak of comics in the 90s with Image came out. Image was releasing their stuff, and there was a big boom going on, and this comic kind of got people really speculating hard. And that's all great and all, but the problem isn't that he died, it's that he came back from the dead, and other big heroes would die and come back from the dead after him, because after Superman died and came back, it made so much money. Every publisher was like, oh, let's do it for every character. DC, Marvel, they killed Captain America, they killed Wolverine, they killed Batman, they killed Flash, even characters that you thought were long dead, because like forever dead, they started coming back. Bucky was famously the one that stayed dead. He came back, right? Bucky Barnes. Flash sacrificed his life in Crisis of Infinite Earths. He came back. Green Lantern, who went nuts and had to die, he came back. Green Arrow, he died, right? He came back, right? So anyway, the point is, the whole problem with this is, when you get rid of death in your universe, you have sort of taken away a lot. Like, death kind of gives meaning to life because it's finite, and it shows like what a life is worth. Once death is reversible, that's over. You lose that tension that would exist. That's why like people like Indy books, because death is death, and death is more, it has that impact. The impact's gone. Like, now we know every time someone's dead, they're not really dead, they're coming back. All the drama, the stakes, because death is where all the stakes lie. Ultimately, the ultimate stake is life. You get rid of death, stakes are just dropped dramatically. So the stakes have been dropped all over the comic book industry, and readers can't keep up. You just can't keep up, because nothing, the tension, the drama, it's gone. And it's hard for new readers to understand what the heck is going on, because they died, they came back. How many times they died and they came back? It's like, kind of, it's numbing. And that's partly what happened. And it's led to the decline of comics, because who reads? I mean, I understand the comic book industry is making a little more money than it did in the late 90s. But it's not that the number of sales have necessarily gone up. It's like the price has gone up. Sales have gone up, but it's the same people buying multiple copies of books because they keep manufacturing scarcity. Is that sustainable, really? Like, it feels like a bubble to me. It just, a lot of what happened in the early 90s that led to the bust, the comic book bust, is boom and bust. Are we not repeating these things right now? and on a kind of a hyper scale, actually. It's kind of like on steroids, which is also like a fun 90s statement that people would usually, people stopped using for the most part. On crack, they say on crack now. But yeah, it's like the 90s boom and bust on crack right now. So you got 20 variants for every issue. You know, an event, right? So events used to be once in a while, event every 3 months. Death of a major character twice a year. You're just losing the meaning of these universes. And at the moment in America, superheroes are the main you know, thing, right? I mean, but you know, interestingly enough, you also have the rise of horror comics, horror and suspense comics, which happened before with EC comics. So horror was on the rise and superheroes are on the wane, because you know, you didn't feel it, because in those old superhero books in the 50s, they were just like, no one got killed, you know, they never died. So there was no tension for that reason, right? And people were into the grittiness of EC Comics, and then the major publishers, you know, the conspiracy is that they got together and they created the Comic Code Authority in order to get EC Comics off the stands, even though to get the biggest player, the new player, out of the market. That's, you know, and but now there is no Comic Code Authority thanks to Marvel, because you know, they were the initial mainstream publisher and decided they're not going to use it anymore across the board, and then you have the rise of these horror books like Haha, like Ice Cream Man, like Something is Killing the Children. These books, they're gaining tons of heat because I think we're getting bored of superheroes, at least the way it is now. Not to mention, I know a lot of people I don't know if people realize this, but Alan Moore and Watchmen sort of foreshadowed all of this that was happening in all these universes. So Watchmen was supposed to be Alan Moore's kind of final statement on the superhero genre, the story to end all stories. It was supposed to be like the furthest you can go with a superhero genre. That's what he did in his series Watchmen. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but he's brought up these intentions. In Watchmen, what happens? Government creates a registration act for superheroes so that you cannot do it unless you're sanctioned by the government. What happens? Horrible, you know, trauma and, you know, sexual assault and different things happening behind the scenes, behind closed doors within these communities, and secrets that kind of tear apart relationships and families. Okay. A Superman that kind of renders like the public like really insecure, and like what it really means for a gods to exist on Earth, right? And then, so, you know, Watchmen's a huge success, so influential, and then what happens after comics are, you know, doing their thing, and then they're losing their audience, right? After the 90s bust, then suddenly in the late 90s, Civil War with the Registration Act, right? Watchmen storyline. So Marvel is executing the Watchmen storyline of registering superheroes. Okay, big hit, but you're following the end statement of what superheroes can do, right? Then what happens with DC, also around the same time, Identity Crisis, where you find out that there was a horrible rape, and you know, a bunch of heroes got mind wiped, and major heroes were involved, and it kind of corrupted everyone. I don't know. To me, that's straight out of Watchmen. So DC does it, Marvel does it. So anyway, they're like pushing these storylines that they've been avoiding because they're sort of the end statement of the superhero genre, and they're executing them now. Marvel, DC, and they ended death. So what you end up doing is you fracture the story universe of these story worlds, because stories don't sustain very well if you get rid of death and you kind of deconstruct the genre so hard that it can never be the same again. And to make some money, DC and Marvel did it. They both executed these plots. which are endgame plots, in my opinion. So then what happens? They just keep trying to chug along, but people don't feel it, yo. So now, like, you know, seeing the industry as a microcosm, let's look at the MCU and the film industry, right? The films are really successful, very successful. You know, arguably the most successful films of all time or whatever, like just, you know, per film on average. But so DC and Marvel, both, you know, they're getting all the hits and everything, but they're using like 60 years of continuity and jamming it into 10 years, right? And then now, both DC and Marvel, in their cinematic universes, have rendered death obsolete. Like, after Endgame, there's no death. Death is reversible because now you can time travel. And they reversed a bunch of death, right? Half the people that died came back. You've gotten rid of your biggest stake. Like, anytime a character dies, you know they can come back now because they've undone death. You know, and I know this works now, but I have a feeling in the long term, this is what's going to render it. The genre is peaked. I believe the genre peaked. I believe you're going to have less and less viewers over time. It's going to be like the Westerns. It peaked. And the reason it peaked is because corporations got greedy and they wanted to make the most money possible, so they used the wildest, most exciting storylines, but endgame storylines that aren't big picture storylines. They're kind of short-term, profit-grabbing storylines. Push them, shove them all in, and now the audience is just kind of burnt out and it's gonna wane. I believe this is what happened to the Star Trek reboot. You know, first one, people loved it. Second one, people were excited, but I don't know, you know, spoiler warning if you didn't see Into Darkness, Star Trek Into Darkness, they undid death because Khan's blood can bring people back to life. There's no death in Star Trek anymore. Like, it happens at the end, but they're like, I'm just like thinking like, wait a minute, you guys cured death? What? Third movie, no one went to see it. We have yet to see what happened after Endgame, really, like, because that is technically a peak, right? Can they do better again? I hope so. I'm not saying I don't want, you know, superhero films to go away necessarily, but they're becoming redundant. And then when you get rid of death, I honestly think they're making a terrible mistake. And I think that's why people like indie books, because, you know, when a character dies, they're dead. That's why people liked Walking Dead. When someone died, they were dead. I mean, death, it's not supposed to be, yeah, death should be permanent, basically. That's why these indie books are doing better. A lot of them are doing better than the old books. Than the mainstream books. And, you know, there's an audience for now, but once the audience for the movies dwindles, all these superhero books and the specs and everything, it's gonna start to, you know, go down a lot. There's gonna be a collapse. I think there's gonna be a collapse as a result. So if you want to see the collapse of the superhero genre, look at the movies. Once the box office starts to shrink because they used up the endgame storylines that Alan Moore kind of introduced, that's when there's gonna be a big collapse, I think, in prices. That's why I love indie books, and because in every indie new universe, they don't just cure death, because everyone recognizes that's like the beginning of the end of your story, in my opinion, or at least like from what I understand in like theory of story. And I was a literature major, but whatever, I didn't use that degree for anything. Anyway, yeah, so this was just more a theory video. I just want to talk about like concepts and theories that I don't hear that much discussion about. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I'm sure these things have been discussed, but I don't know if these connections have been made too often, and I think these are connections we should look at as consumers and creators, and you know, things to consider, especially if we're building our own new comic book universes, whether they be superhero or not. Because ultimately, when you get rid of death, that's when you really murder your characters. Unless your character's premise is that they came back from the dead. That's the exception to the rule. But otherwise, yeah, that's what it is. And that is something, you know, I think we need to discuss. Anyway, if you like this video, like, subscribe, and, you know, we can debate this in the comments. I wouldn't mind. Please don't kill me. But do you agree? Do you disagree? I really want to know. I do want to have this debate. Yeah, and let's talk about it, and whether this is something we can come back from, because this is, I'm feeling it in the wind, you know. Or maybe I'm wrong, and I could be wrong, and that's cool too. Because that's the nice thing about opinions; they should be able to change. Anyway, hope you liked the video, and happy collecting.